Welcome to the Sermon Podcast for Family Life Church. We meet every Sunday morning and in homes throughout the week in our area to connect with others and with God, to serve others like Christ would, and to grow in the knowledge of Jesus Christ. We hope that you are encouraged by today's message.
Exodus chapter 15. Last week we started a series called God of the Movement, and we talked about last week that God is not just the God of the moment. Remember when he was the God of the moment because when they got to the Red Sea, God created a way for them to get across. He was the God of the moment. Okay? Can you imagine standing on this side of the Red Sea and all of a sudden that sea parts open and you cross on dry land and you're like looking into a wall of water. I wonder things because that's how my mind works. Like, could you see the fish in there? Like were the fish swimming right up to the wall, but of course they couldn't swim out because there was a wall. Like an aquarium kind of a thing. You know what I'm saying? And some of you are like, why would you think that? Well, that's just how my mind. Could you see any snakes that were in there? Or did they have alligators then? I don't know, crocodiles or whatever. But this wall goes up, and God was the God of the moment. But God is not just the God of the moments, because we don't live constantly in those kind of miracles happening in our lives. I mean, every day you don't have Red Sea experiences, okay? From our perspective, in looking at the size or the bigness of miracles, we don't see miracles like that every day. And sometimes you go through long times, long seasons, and you don't see anything great like that. And I think that that's God saying, I'm not just the God of the moment, but I'm the God of life. I'm just the God of everyday life. The fact that you woke up this morning and both your legs cooperated with you to get your tail out of bed, and your legs walked, and guess what? You breathe and your eyes blink. That's a miracle. It really is a miracle. Your heart is still beating. Your brain, most of you, is still functioning. Yeah, you ate and you swallowed. You didn't think about it. You just did it. All those things, you were fearfully and wonderfully created. It's a miracle. That's just life. Some of you woke up with a headache because your sinuses. Some of you woke up cold because it got cold overnight and it's damp outside, and it's like, do I turn my heat on? Do I turn my air on? What do I do? It's just life. God is the God of all those things in just ordinary, everyday life. He is the God of the moment, and he does do miraculous things, but we don't always see those every day. So the next 4 or 5 weeks now, not counting next Sunday, this series is really my heart, and what I believe God's heart in this whole series is to prepare us for what God wants to do in our midst, okay? I mean, I have like major anticipation for 2020, okay? I don't know about you, but I just have major anticipation, good anticipation for 2020, and I believe this is just preparing us for what God wants to do. God always prepares his people before he requires something from them. He prepares them for what he's going to do, okay? And so I believe prayer is part of that, and I believe this series will be part of that also. I heard a great illustration, just as a point of humor, but also to prove a very good point, of the Red Sea and what happened in kids' church, not here at our church, but this little boy, we'll call him Johnny, for lack of a better word, went home and told his mom. The mom said, "What did you learn in kids' church today?" And he said, "Mom, I learned about Moses leading the children of Israel across the Red Sea." She said, "Tell me about that story." He said, "Well, here's the way it is. They got to the Red Sea and they couldn't get across. The army was coming from behind, Pharaoh's army, and he fully intended to kill them. That's what he was going to do. So all of a sudden, the Department of Homeland Security showed up. Navy SEALs came crawling out of the Red Sea, like this massive force of army. And before we knew it, the Air Force was flying above our heads. And there was this massive war that went on right there between Homeland Security and Navy SEALs and the Air Force, and Pharaoh's army was coming, and they were all fighting, and God's people won, and the Air Force lifted all the people from one side of the sea to the other side of the sea. The mother said, "That's what they taught you? We're going to have to talk to Amanda." She said, "I think that you're probably lying to me." No, ma'am, that's what they taught me." She said, "Johnny, you're telling me that they told you this. No, ma'am. But if you don't believe what I just told you, you'd never believe what the teacher told us in class. Okay? Yeah. So it was an amazing story. Little Johnny just didn't know what to do with it. The children of Israel had been liberated from, some of you will get that in a minute. The children of Israel had been liberated from slavery, and the future looked bright on the eastern shore of that sea, but they had some serious questions to still face because they weren't in the promised land yet, okay? So the question was, now what? Or what's next? Or next steps, okay? So where do we go next? And God's answer ultimately was this, not that God said these exact words, but I think if you look at it, I think the heart of God was, I want you to spend a long time getting to know everything you can about me. I think that's what God was really saying to them. I think we'll prove that this morning. I want you to spend a long time, maybe 40 years, getting to know everything you can about me, because that's important. After the miracle of the moment, after the big Red Sea experience, begins a lifelong process, slowly over time, coming out and getting to know more and more about God. It never stops. Your knowledge of God never stops. And when it stops, then you're dead. It's over. You're constantly learning more and more about God as you read His Word. I'm amazed how I read the same thing over and over again, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, I never saw that. I'm like, Melody, somebody's written in my Bible. They changed it from the last time. You ever done that? It's something changed. God is always present. God is always personally involved. God is always powerfully working. God is always providing. And God is always patient. These are some absolute things. So one of the biggest truths, and I got to hurry because I only have 21 minutes left. One of the biggest truths God wanted us to understand, write this down in your notes, is where God guides, God provides. Where God guides you, God will provide for you. Let me say it again. Where God guides, God provides. When God leads you to do something, He'll provide the people, He'll provide the power, He'll provide the resources, and everything you need to fulfill His purpose, God will provide that for you when He calls you. Okay? The whole process is a long process of getting to know God day by day. I like to say it this way. It's a long obedience in the same direction. A long obedience in the same direction. He's not just interested in, will you obey me once, but will you obey me in the long haul? Will you obey me day after day after day when you don't understand, when you don't see it, when you don't like it, when you don't feel it, all those things, when it gets to those things, will you still obey me? And so let's read together Exodus chapter 15. Right after the Red Sea moment, they've just crossed over. Then Moses led the people of Israel away from the Red Sea, and they moved out into the desert of Shur. They traveled in this desert for 3 days without finding any water. Think on that. 3 days. And when they came to the oasis of Marah, the water was too bitter to drink, so they called the place Marah, which means bitter. Okay? Then the people complained and turned against Moses. Don't you love this group? Okay? What are we going to drink? They demanded. Okay? They're a little upset. All right. So Moses cried out unto the Lord for help, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. You see how God is already providing? Okay. Showed him a piece of wood. Moses threw it into the water, and this made for the water good to drink. Imagine that, the first water filter. You know, it was Moses' stick. And it was there that Marah, that the Lord sat before them the following decree as a standard to test their faithfulness to them. Verse 26 says, if you will listen carefully to the voice of your Lord and God and do what's right in His sight, obeying His commands and keeping His decrees, then, everybody say then, I will not make you suffer any of the diseases I sent on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. We love to take that last part of the verse that says, I am the Lord that heals you. I am the God that healeth thee. I am the Lord, your healer. But He said, I'll heal you when? Then. When was then? After you have done this, He said, if you'll carefully listen to the voice of the Lord, do what's right in His sight, obey His commands, keep His decrees, then you'll know me as the Lord your healer. Okay, well, let's go on. Verse 27, and leaving Marah, the Israelites traveled on to the oasis of Elim, where they found the 12 springs and 70 palm springs, and they camped there beside the waters, okay? So what are some of the lessons that you can learn on this long obedience in the same direction? Four things. Number one, we follow God not because of what he does for us, but because he is good and worthy of following. That's simple. I know that's super, super, super simple and basics. We follow God not because of what he does for us. I don't follow God because he healed me. I don't follow God because he healed my broken arm or he gave me this or he provided. I follow him because he is good and he is worthy to be praised. He's worthy to be followed. And if you follow him for any other reason, you're following for the wrong reason. You don't follow because of what you can get from him. You follow him because of who he is, okay, and who he is. Moses, so the first thing you see is these children of Israel are complaining that they don't have any water. God makes the water good through Moses casting the stick in the water, and then 3 days later they find 12 more springs. God is telling us four things there. If you'll listen carefully, do what's right in his sight, obey his commands, and keep his decree, which is really just life. That's just everyday life. Every day you have to listen carefully to his voice. Every day you have to do what's right in his sight. Not some days or Sunday, okay? Or when people are around you. You have to do what's right all the time. You have to obey his commands, whether you feel like them, agree with them, or like them. You have to obey them, okay? And you have to keep his decree. This shows the everyday life of a disciple of Christ. These kind of things happen every day, not when, man, praise God, God's really moving in our church and God's doing amazing things. I'm going to obey God. No, you obey him in the hard times. You obey him in the times that you don't get it. You obey him in those times that you're maybe even angry. You still obey. You still listen. You still do what he says, and you keep his decrees. Then he says, you'll not suffer any of the diseases I sent on the Egyptians because I'm the Lord that heals you. So throughout the days, actually 40 years, that went on, God kept telling them about himself and what he wanted them to learn. Not only principles did he give them to live by, but and knowing more stuff for how to perform for God. He wanted them to know him, not just his things. Think about it as parents. If your kids only loved you because of the Christmas gifts that you gave to them, during the rest of the year, they could care less about you. Maybe some of you feel that way. I don't know. But that wouldn't be kind of any kind of a thing. If I only loved Melody when she did something good for me, or she loved me, but only when I brought her flowers or did something extra for her. That's not the kind of relationship we're supposed to have, regardless, no matter how much God wanted us to know him. He wanted them to follow him, not because of the things he had did for them. He wanted them to follow him because of who he was. That I am the God, I am your God. Know this, know me, okay? He is just always there. He is not saying I'm going to not just be there in those big moments of your life. I'm going to take care of the daily things that you need. I am your daily provision for everything you need. Do you believe that? That's who God is. And that's what he wanted to know. That's really his character. And so when you really understand who he is, which is wrapped up in his character, his grace, and his mercy, that's who God is. You see him in his character, you see him through his grace, and you see him through his mercy. That makes us alone want to follow him. As Americans, we are super, super, super spoiled because we have so many things at our fingertips. We complain about a lot, but guys, we have a whole lot. None of you walked to church this morning. We've talked about that. None of you had to go to the well to draw well water to take your shower this morning and warm it up. Most of you, if you had breakfast or coffee this morning, had it warmed and it was cooked on a stove and you didn't have to build a fire to go out and cook it. Most of you didn't have to go out in the woods and look for something to eat yesterday. You probably went to the grocery store and bought it, especially the way most of our hunters are in this church. Just a little dig there towards our hunters. So we eat and drink what we want here in America. We have heat and air. We get too hot, we go over to a little device on the wall, switch it to cool, and turn it down. We get too cold, we go back to that same device, and it's just creature comforts. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but sometimes we get to depending on that, and we kind of have this mentality that we're entitled things because we're an American, because we live in a free world. And God's like, no, you don't have those things because you're an American. You have those things because I bless the country that you lived in or that you live in, and I bless who you are because of who I am. That's why we have these things. We know the truth. We have to keep it in perspective. We wonder at times why God just doesn't move on our behalf when we're praying for maybe an illness or something that we need to see God moving. We're praying for that miracle of the moment, but it doesn't always happen. God is saying, I want you to follow me in a long obedience in the same direction. Why? Because I am the Lord, your healer. He is the healer. He's our provider. He's our guide, our rescuer, our redeemer, and he's worthy of praise whether we feel like it or not. So we don't follow him because of what he's done. Now, Exodus chapter 16, verse 1 through 13. Then the whole community of Israel set out towards Elim and journeyed towards the wilderness of Sin. Be careful when you go towards Sin. Between Elim and Mount Sinai, they arrived on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. Dude, I'm glad I wasn't Pastor Moses. What a group. You know, I mean, God's already done all this, and now they're whining and complaining. God help Moses. I hope I get to meet Moses in heaven. It probably won't matter to me when I get there, but I hope I do. These people were saying this, if only the Lord had taken us back to Egypt, they moaned. They were sat around, we sat around pots filled with meat. Have you ever ate potted meat? It's nothing to brag about. I don't know what their deal was with that, but anyway. And they sat around pots filled with meat, and they ate all the bread they wanted. Brother Goff, you probably would have liked that. Now you have brought us into the wilderness to starve us all to death. I'm sure Moses planned that out. I'm going to lead 2 million people away from slavery, and I'm going to lead them out into the wilderness and kill them. I'm not going to give them anything to drink, and I'm not going to give them any food. I'm pretty sure he premeditated that mass murder. Probably not. Then the Lord said to Moses, look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day, again, you see God's provision. Each day, tell the people to go out and pick up as much food as they need for the day. Don't get selfish with it. I will test them to see whether or not they will follow my instruction. On the 6th day, they will gather food and they'll prepare it. There they'll provide twice as much as usual. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people, by evening you will realize it was the Lord that brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning you will see the glory of the Lord because he has heard your complaints, which were against him, not against us. Okay? And which, what we have done, what have we done that you should complain about us? Then Moses added, then the Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread to satisfy you in the morning. And he heard, I lost my place. For he has heard all your complaints against him. What have we done? Yes, your complaints are against the Lord, not against us. Then Moses said to Aaron, announce to this community of Israel, present yourselves before the Lord, for he has heard your complaining. And as Moses spoke to the whole community of Israel, they looked out towards the wilderness. There they could see the awesome glory of the Lord in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the Israelites' complaints. Now tell them, in the evening you will have meat to eat. In the morning you'll have bread, all the bread you want, and country crock butter. Then you will know, maybe that wasn't there. Then you'll know that I am the Lord your God. That evening the vast number of quail flew in and covered the camp. And the next morning the area around camp was wet with dew. When the dew evaporated, a flaky substance, Kellogg's cornflakes, a flaky substance, I'm just kidding, as fine as the frost blanketed on the ground. The Israelites were puzzled when they saw it. They said, what is it? Sometimes you ask God for provision so long you don't see it when he gives it to you. They asked each other. They had no idea what it was, even though Moses had already told them. And Moses told them, it is the food that the Lord has given you to eat. So you have here the Israelites run to the Red Sea. They complain to God. They go 3 days without water. They complain to God. They get water because now it's too bitter. So God fixes that. 3 days later, you know what I'm saying? How do you feel about these people? I don't know about you, but I'm thinking you guys are a bunch of whiner 49ers. I mean, always whining and complaining. The rest of the chapter gives some very specific instructions. How to collect the food, only gather what you need today, prepare twice as much on Friday because the next day is a day of rest. So the children of Israel complain. God shows up, speaks to them in a cloud and speaks to them. And he says, I've heard your request and here's what I'm going to do. Here's the second point that you need to get. God provides not because of what we do for him, but because of his patient, pursuing love for us. It should be in your notes there. God provides not because of what we do for him. He's not interested in us performing for him, but he does it because of his patient, pursuing love for us. So we are so much like the Israelites, though, us today. We complain about life in the wilderness and how the children of Israel were complaining about they long for the days of slavery when they could go back and eat that potted meat. And God's saying, hey, I want to take you to Longhorn. And they're like, no, I want to go back and eat a can of potted meat. Just really crazy, okay? Well, what God wanted to do. We sometimes look at the God of the Old Testament, we mentioned this last week, and we say, well, the God of the Old Testament wasn't really as grace-filled and as much mercy as the God in the New Testament. The fact of the matter, he's the same God. He's the exact same God. We said it last week, how sometimes we look at the God in the New Testament and we say, gosh, how long-suffering he is and how much he reached out, and then how in the New Testament it's the reckless love of God. He's ever reaching, ever loving, ever giving, ever forgiving. But we don't find that in the Old Testament. But really, you see the same God. You see God delivering his people from slavery. You see God parting the Red Sea. You see that they never got thirsty. They never got hungry because he was given food. He said, I just want them to know that I love them and I'm going to run after them and what they need. Every time he said, you would find God saying, and now you'll know that I am the Lord your God. Why? Because he had just showed them something great for them. It's grace alone that provides so wonderful for such complainers. So don't tell me that God was not graceful in the Old Testament. He was extremely graceful. They are so lucky, and if God had not been a God of grace and mercy, he probably would have just killed them right there on the spot. But instead, he gave to them grace and mercy. Here's the third point. We only got one left after this. God gives us tests not to fail us, but to bless us even more. God gives us tests not to fail us, but to bless us even more. Exodus chapter 4, verse 16, verse 4. I think it'll be on the screen. Then the Lord said to Moses, look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you each day. The people will come out and pick up as much food as they need for the day. I will test them to see if they're going to follow my instruction. He's not trying to test us to make us sin. We're pretty good at sinning on our own. Okay? He didn't have to test us to make us do that. His big test in us was providing for us this way. His questions were, will you walk by faith? Will you trust me just to go out and get what you need today? Don't hoard up for tomorrow. Don't worry about 5 days from now. Just go get what you need to eat today. Big test. Will you trust me in faith? It was demonstrated by obedience and not by sight, because sight would say, I better get a little extra for tomorrow just in case my need is great. I just have to be responsible as a father, as a husband, as a provider. I better put a little in my pocket just in case Johnny gets hungry tomorrow and in case God doesn't come through. But that wouldn't be obedience. Obedience says, I'm just going to get what I need today because I know God will provide tomorrow what I need. That's why it's easy and cheap to give to this, because it might be spare change in my pocket, but somebody may need it tomorrow and you don't need it, so you get rid of it expecting God will replenish what you gave away, because that's why he wants to bless you. Not so that you can go out and buy houses, cars, and airplanes, and Rolex watches, but he wants to bless you so you can bless other people in the process. That's a good place to say amen, but perhaps you don't want to, and that's okay too. This is America. God is wanting us to grow in what we can handle. God is wanting us to grow in what we can handle. And he does that by giving us in the test of saying, will you walk by faith? Will you demonstrate that by obedience and not walk by sight? Let me go on. Exodus chapter 17, verse 1, it says this, and the Lord's command, the whole community of Israel left the wilderness of Sin and moved from the place to place. Eventually, they camped at Rephidim. That's probably not even close. But there was no water there for the people to drink again. So once more, the people complained against Moses. Give us water to drink, they demanded. Moses has had enough, y'all. He says, quiet. Okay. Moses replied, why are you complaining against me? And why are you testing the Lord? God gives us tests. Sometimes we want to give God tests. But our tests are to prove whether God failed us or not. I prayed, God never did heal. He failed. Okay? That's kind of what they're doing right there. And why are you, Moses says that. So anyway, verse 3, tormented by thirst, they continued to argue with Moses. Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us, our children, and our livestock with this thirst? I mean, Moses has got to have almost had enough by now. Then Moses cried out to the Lord. He said, God, what should I do with this people? They're ready to stone me. Can you picture Moses? He probably tries to go off into a quiet place. The Bible doesn't say that, but I kind of think he probably would, or maybe he just did it right in front of him. Maybe he just threw a fit. And he's like, and he looked up to God, maybe even put his hands up to God, and he said, God, what do you want me to do with these people? In today's world, we would have said, what do you want to do with these crazy people, God? And he probably would have told the people, shut up. And we're not supposed to say that word, but it's not politically correct. But maybe today they would have. Hush! God, what do you want me to do with these people? I absolutely love what God says, and it proves to me God has a sense of humor, so just relax. God says, the Lord said to Moses, walk out in front of the people. Did God not hear that Moses just said they want to stone him? And God's answer to Moses when they said, Moses says to God, God, they're wanting to stone me. God says, step out in front of them. I'm talking, if I'd have been Moses, now I would have said, God, what did I do to upset you today? And God comforts him a little bit, and he says, take your staff with him. Oh, great, I've got a stick. What am I going to play, baseball? I hope I swing fast and good. Okay, anyway, I don't know. Maybe you just need to imagine it, because, I mean, he didn't probably just think, oh, that's cool, I'm going to go walk out. Okay, I don't know, maybe he did. Take your staff, the one you used when you struck the water Nile, and call some of the elders of Israel to join you. I will stand before you on the rock of Mount Sinai, and I'm going to destroy these people. No, that's not what God said at all. He said, I'll stand before you at the rock on Mount Sinai, strike the rock, and water will come gushing out. Then the people will be able to drink. So Moses struck the rock as he was told. The water gushed out as the elders looked on. God gives us a lot of tests to pass, and sometimes we give God a test to fail. But what we just hear, we have to find ourselves in these people, in these Egyptian people, because we are so much like them. We are so much like them. God's calling us to do something that maybe is a brand new thing, and we're like, but God, why did we come all the way out here? We could have just stayed the way that we were. And God's saying, but that's not. I wanted to see if you'll get to know me and follow me where I want to go and do what I want to do and trust and believe and have faith and know me. So the picture he gives is great. I'm going to have to wrap it. I got to begin to close here. And this picture that he gives is great, okay? I told you there's a lot of foreshadowing and types and shadows of this. In the Old Testament, okay, this picture that we just saw of Moses hitting the rock, okay, smiting the rock, and water comes gushing out to provide them the water they needed to drink. 3 days they haven't drank anything. All of a sudden he hits the rock with the stick that he had used to cross the Red Sea. People are so mad they're fixing to stone him. He hits the rock. Water comes gushing out once again to prove that God has provided. Okay? Such a beautiful picture. In the New Testament, this rock was Christ. You remember when he was at Pharaoh, was standing before Pharaoh, and they took him out, and he got down. He was strapped down to some kind of a pole or to a rock, and they began to beat him. I believe that, I don't know the correct words, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I believe one translation said they began to smite him. They began to beat him, and what came out of him? Fluid, water came out, blood came out of his body. That is just a foreshadow right there of what had already happened way back when, or really Moses smiting the rock there and water provision coming out of it was a foreshadow of what was to come in Jesus Christ. Amazing. It gets better. I only got 17 seconds, but I got to hurry. There was a type or shadow of what's to come. Isaiah 53 talks about that. We see that Christ kneels before Pilate. I just told you that. I said Pharaoh, I'm sorry. Pilate, and it was stricken, so water came out. This same person, Jesus Christ, sat on a well that he should have had nothing to do with this Samaritan woman because culturally it wasn't acceptable for him to be there. With this lady who had been married multiple times. In fact, there were 3 times in Scripture that men found their wives at wells. The meeting at the well was kind of a Match.com or ChristianMingle.com. It was maybe the place to hang out if you're looking for single ladies. And Jesus should have never been there, but all of a sudden one day he was there, and he shouldn't have been there. And this woman comes up, and he asked the woman for something to drink, and she said, I can't give you. And she made all the excuses. And he said, I'll give you water that you'll never drink, you'll never thirst again. Again, he's saying, hey, I am that provision. Out of me is going to come the provision you need. Moses had a shadow of it way back then, and here it is again that I am the living water. I provided water in Exodus chapter 16. When Moses hit the rock, the water came out of it. And here's what's going to happen. They're going to hit me, and water and blood's going to come out of me, and it's going to be life-giving water for you, and you'll never thirst again. Incredible. Number 4, the last thing is God ultimately wants us to see his biggest provision of all, and that's the redemption offered by Jesus Christ on the cross. God ultimately wants us to see the biggest provision of all, bigger than the Red Sea, bigger than the lion's den, bigger than the fiery furnace, bigger than the well that Jonah was in, bigger than all those things. The biggest provision of all was the redemption offered by Jesus Christ. Remember last week when we were talking about crossing the Red Sea, we established that everything that happened in the Old Testament points towards Jesus on the cross, and everything that happens in the New Testament points back to Jesus, remember? And this is a perfect example of this right here. So here's the practical side of Christ. God wants you to learn to walk by faith, not by sight, and to follow him, to trust him to provide, to just learn to obey, to learn that he's your healer. A lot of us want to follow God if. There's a lot of people in our world that want to follow God if he fixes my problems, if things get easier, if he shows himself, if I see something miraculous, if my body gets healed, if things get easier. But God just doesn't want you following him if all those things happening. He wants you to understand that he's already provided the greatest provision. Put that point down, thank you. The greatest provision of all is when he put his son, Jesus Christ, on the cross. That was the greatest God of the moment that he could ever do. And if he never does anything else great in your life, he's already done enough. I went and had communion with Joe and Judy yesterday, and Joe must have said 15 times, which really confirmed to me that God wanted me to say this to you. Joe kept on saying, he's already done enough. He's already done enough. He's already finished everything he's going to do. He's already done enough. He's already done enough. And if we can just get it in our head that he's already done enough for us, we've seen the greatest miracle. Why do we doubt him anymore? All the good things that I have in my life now are not because I did good, I lived good, or I thought good. It's because of what he did for me. And let me close, because I'm 3 minutes over. And here's the deep theological side of this whole message. God has provided for your redemption by providing a payment for your sin in Jesus Christ. And Jesus becomes our daily provision as well. He is the source of life for every single thing I need every day that I live. It's a well that I can go to every day. It's a well that I don't have to go to and strike it to make anything. I don't have to go hit the rock to make anything gush out. It's already all happened. Everything, every daily need I have, he has already provided. He said, I'll be enough every day. Whatever you need, I'm it. I don't have to beg him for more. I don't have to plead. I don't have to fast. Somebody asked me about fasting and fasting to get God to move. I think that's just as silly can be. I think fasting doesn't really change the heart of God. I think fasting really changes your heart towards God, because you begin to fast and you get to know God, and all of a sudden you realize he's already provided those things, and he already wants to heal your body, and he already wants to move in your life. He doesn't want you to starve yourself to death, so he'll want to love you and he'll want to bless you. Fasting puts away the things of this earth and says, I'm just going to take a long walk on commitment and getting to know God through prayer and through worship, so that I know that this God here provides everything I need. He is the source of all my needs. He is the supply for everything I need. I don't have to impress him. I don't have to do any of those things. He just loves me as I am. So where God calls or where God guides, God provides. And I believe through the cross, through Jesus Christ, God provided the ultimate sacrifice once and for all. If he never does another great miracle, which he will, but if he never did, he's done all that we need. Everything that we need. Provision. Father.
If you would like more information about today's message or about our church, we invite you to visit us online at familylifepa.com or on Facebook at Family Life PA. If you would like more information about today's message or about our church, we invite you to visit us online at familylifepa.com or on Facebook at Family Life PA.